Good morning from WKYT News. We hope you're having a great weekend. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. Later, a discussion on stress in the workplace and the special challenges these days when as many as 4 different generations are now working together. Human resources expert Brian Simmons will be joining us later. But first, the president of the Kentucky Senate, Robert Stivers, is here. Governor Matt Bevin and other GOP leaders have unveiled a 10-point plan to deal with Kentucky's enormous pension liabilities. The proposal requires lots of changes, especially for employees yet to be hired. Kentucky Education Association President Stephanie Winkler has said it would be devastating to public education. The Kentucky League of Cities has issued a long list of questions and concerns, but the governor says kicking the problem down the road is over because it is holding the state back. He also makes note that there are more Kentuckians getting retirement checks now than the number of those working in the public sector. Joining us is Kentucky Senate President Robert Stivers, Republican from Manchester, who served in the legislature more than 20 years. And we thank you for coming in. Appreciate it.
Glad to be here, Bill.
Well, you and the governor and the House Speaker have all called this a very complicated matter that you put a lot of hours in on trying to come up with something. You know how we got into the situation. You have heard the pushback. Where do things stand now, 10 days after the announcement was made?
Well, I think the bill, a rough draft of the bill is ready to be delivered to members today or the first of next week. It is a complicated issue because you're talking about multiple systems that don't have similar circumstances, such as you spoke about Ms. Winkler and the KTRS. It has different factors, different retirement age, different ways you deal with sick day credits, CERS, which is primarily city, county, employees, libraries, things of that nature, which is a different system together, and they have different ways of dealing with when people were hired, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, KERS, which is a different system as well with the various subdivisions, along with hazardous and non-hazardous designation for first responders, police officers, firefighters. So it is a complex system. Really, it's more than a system, it's a complex series of systems that we're trying to deal with.
You have tried to clarify this week in saying that you have felt there was misinformation out there about what happened and that the legislature is not fully to blame for not putting money into the pensions, has been the narrative from many.
Well, in a document, and I know several people saw this, and I brought this, and we referenced Louis Nunn, as you said earlier.
Because he always brought documents.
He brought his documents,
right.
But this was a document provided by Gary Harbin, who is the director of KTRS, the Kentucky Teacher Retirement System, and they did a 6-year study. Now, I understand and that you may need to look at longer periods, but even PFM, who did a study, it's an actuarial study, came back and said, look, funding is somewhere between 10 to 15% of the problem. Okay, if we're talking about $15 billion problem in KTRS alone, let's assume it's 15%. Where would the other $12.5 billion be? And over a 6-year period, this is what KTRS put out.
So where were the leaks?
They have an other category, which was averaging $250 million a year in lost value to the unfunded liability. Now, $250 million is way more than what they were wanting for contributions from the legislature. Because if you average what they were saying the legislature should have done, it was about $125 million a year. But they're losing $250 million in this other category. They go on to say methods and actuarial assumptions were bad. And that was $1.6 billion over 6 years. And then market losses versus assumptions was $4.1 billion. So their total loss, or their total unfunded liability that accumulated for a 6-year period, was $7.8 billion. Only $700 million of that they attribute to funding, so 9%. So where's the other 90% of their problem? And that's where truly we value teachers, we value state employees, but somebody needs to start questioning the system. The system, where is this other $7.1 billion?
And do you, at this point, have an answer to that?
Well, part of it is, and admittedly so, that they lost a lot of assets, a lot of resources in, I think it was 2009 and 10 during the Great Depression. So that's part of it. But other, we don't know what other is. That was losing $250 million a year, and there's no designation of what other is.
So we're to a point that we are, and there's now this plan that is put forward, and as you again, we'll just address the teachers' concerned at this point. Some retired teachers will be asked to shoulder more of their health care going forward, right?
Not retired teachers. Retired teachers, what we were asking...
Those who will retire in the future is what I'm... Yeah,
correct,
yeah,
correct.
Right,
retired teachers, we are only asking to take a suspension of their COLA, which is 1.5% for a 5-year period. Now, we could reduce health care benefits, but I think it's more important to do what's morally right, because health care benefits are something that are more valued now than they ever have been, especially for the elderly population, retirement population.
Now,
so,
the KEA makes the case that it will become more difficult to hire teachers without a benefits package that includes the full health care coverage and a guaranteed retirement when they're finished with their career.
And I don't think anywhere in this proposal do we suggest that teachers don't have a health care benefit upon retirement. It's going up. It's more costly. I would assume that you and your employer probably saw double-digit increases in healthcare costs. We are asking for a 3% participation to this to pay for it currently and into the future. But I don't know anywhere in there that we're asking that you don't have a retirement benefit for healthcare. In fact, that's one of the things I just said. We're exempting that.
Well, I think the reference to paying this 3% is what
I can understand that.
Yeah.
And Ms. Winkler is saying this, that a benefits package, when you look at what we're doing, because teachers, and we're talking teachers, we're going to propose an 18% contribution to a 401A, and I want people to understand the difference between 401A and 401K. 401A is a mandatory replacement plan for your income upon retirement, and 18% is higher than anything in the private sector substantially. To be exempt by Social Security, you only have to go at 7.5% of your earnings to be exempt, and we're going to 18%.
Mr. President, describe for us then what you think this plan will do and how people should be thinking in terms of what they're going to be getting and dealing with going forward as state employees.
Okay, state employees, and I love to use the term bell curve, you know, probabilities. You try to do what you can do to satisfy the most people. There will always be exceptions to the rule. But when I've talked with state employees, and again, state employees are different than teachers, they say, well, we want to make sure we have that ability to retire at 27 years. Okay, this plan does that. So if you want to retire at 27, you can. If you want to stay on, you're still going to get a benefit, but it's going to be a different type of benefit. It's going to be a 401A benefit. Plus, state employees will still have and be eligible for Social Security. If you have more than 27 years, you get to keep it. So if you're at 32, 33, you get to keep it. If you want to stay on, you go to a defined contribution system. For teachers, it's different because they have a totally different system. If you're at 27 years, you get to keep what you get, and you continue for another 3 years to get contributions in a defined benefit system. Your sick days, which you get to sell back to the system at 30% value or added to your last year's salary, you get to keep that for 5 years. If you're below 27, you get to 27. So they have the ability to retire at 27 years, every person in the system. If they want to go on, if you're over 27, you get to accumulate for 3 to 5 years more. If you want to stay beyond that, you get a defined contribution system. All new hires will be in a defined contribution system.
Now, you referred to various systems, and they also have the cities and counties, and they are issuing their concerns right now. Many of them, the mayors, the county executives, and so forth, very concerned that they're going to be hit with a big bill next year that's going to be very difficult for them to handle. Will that be the case? Well,
in this bill, what we propose is a one-year moratorium. So if they're paying 15% of payroll or 20% of payroll, That's where it'll be next year. But then they're going to have to graduate that up over 3 years and go to what in their system is based on an actuarially required contribution. They're going to have to go to that level, which may be 35% of payroll, but that would be phased in over 3 years. So next year, hold harmless. Year 2, you pay 5% or 1/3 more. Year 3, 66%, and then you're up at 100%. So it's a 4-year phase in, so they don't get just the shock of all this money having to be paid at one time.
All right, we're with Senate President Robert Stivers on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We'll continue our discussion in a moment. How is the state going to get the funding and the revenue to pull this off? And we're back in a moment. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers as we visit with the President of the Kentucky Senate, Robert Stivers, continue our discussion about this retirement situation that Kentucky finds itself in and trying to find a way out of. The governor has said, you know, there really are no alternatives to coming up at this point with some sort of money, at least that he agrees to. He does not want to do casinos. He does not want to legalize marijuana. You're shaking your head in agreement those would be unlikely.
Yeah, I can't be personally, I don't like the option of legalizing marijuana. It's a gateway drug. People have said, well, it may have medicinal value. Well, show me a study that says it's medicinal or therapeutic and we can consider it. But legalizing it for recreational use, that's a non-starter with me. The same thing with expanded land-based casino gaming. The law is what it is now. Let's leave it alone. Let it take its course. But for going to full land-based casino gaming, that's a zero-sum game. Somebody's losing, somebody's winning. They're not all people are prospering in it, and I just don't agree with that. And so the governor and I are on the same page.
As you look at ways then to come up with the money to put into pensions, to fund the, as we've learned the new term, actuarially required contributions, the ARCs, where does the legislature go?
Well, we've been stagnant too, and you know, one of the things I admit on loss of value and unfunded liability or increase in unfunded liability was downturns in the economy. So we're just starting to come out of the recession. We're seeing growth in our budget, our sales. We're going to have to hold expenses and flatline our expenses. And hopefully that these jobs announcements that you've heard with Amazon and Brady and other things start expanding the economy. I just heard the bourbon industry is really booming. The automobile manufacturing is taking off. You know, housing is going up. So we hope expansion of the economy is a large part of that.
But our current budget is running a considerable shortfall, and we know that, you know, going into next year, there are lots of hands out. There are lots of issues out there.
And the largest is $1 billion to go in to maintain the funding levels of the pensions if we don't make systemic changes. And truly, we want to make sure that the teachers and the people who are going out in the middle of the night to scrape our roads and getting called out for social services issues, that they understand what they're getting, and we value those. But it's still $1 billion problem we're going to have to deal with if we don't make structural and systemic changes. And that's going to take away from schools and things of that nature. So your alternatives are tax increases or, you know, systemic changes in the pension systems or budget cuts. Now, some budget cuts will be easy, in my opinion, will be very easy. And I can give examples, some of the examples of those.
Give a couple. Okay.
We don't do means testing in the state of Kentucky. And I understand that a lot of people, a lot of it's problems with the drugs, and that's such a big opioid crisis, that you're seeing family members taking care of family members, basically children. You know, if you have a $25,000, $30,000 household income, and you're going to have to take on the responsibility of a grandchild, I understand helping those individuals. But myself and my wife, if we were to take custody of one of our grandchildren, we would be qualified for that dependency supplement too. And that's not right. We shouldn't be, because we have the means to take care of it. I don't want that to sound arrogant, but there's no means testing, and there's so many programs out there that have no means testing that people are taking.
Does it end there? I mean, do you, you know, because you go to other things, there, you know, the free school lunches are universal now in many of our schools.
We need to look at all that, because, and that was one of the things that just kind of amazed me, is why are certain people getting free things when their families are making $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 net incomes? and we need to do mean testing. That's one part. There's other programs out there that we've never gone back for years and said, all right, justify your program. They may justify it, and they actually may need more money. They may need less money, or they may not even need to be in existence. And there are several programs I can think of that could qualify for that, but I don't want to speak for them. I've got a list, and we've already identified in my staff $30 million that needs to be justified, why it needs to go forward.
The President of the United States has given the states some flexibility in dealing with the opioid crisis. There were 1,400 overdose deaths in Kentucky last year. As you know, Mr. President, our jails are full in many cases. First responders are run ragged trying to get to situations where they can administer Narcan. Is that going to be an issue that is likely to be talked about a lot in the legislative session and maybe might also require more money?
Well, that's something you can go back, Bill, and you've been around me and seen me for years. That's one thing I've talked about for years on the floor. I've even taken criticism because I wanted to limit ephedrine and pseudoephedrine, which was the primary ingredient for meth. It will continue to be a problem. But I want people to understand this. It only takes one or two to create a bad situation. And prescribing opioids needs to be looked at from who is prescribing it and is there really that need to be prescribing. My hometown had a terrible article written about it. 3 million dosages written for Clay County. That's 150 for every man, woman, and child. That's wrong. That's wrong. And I don't want to offend anybody, but I don't care if I do. Somebody in my hometown needs to be looked at. If that many dosages, or whoever is outside of my hometown writing those prescriptions, needs to be looked at, because there's no way that there is the need for 150 opioid prescriptions or dosages in my hometown for every man, woman, and child every year.
President Stivers, thanks for coming. Lots of tough issues coming up. We appreciate you being here. Coming next on Kentucky Newsmakers, a human resources expert and consultant on how challenging the workplace can be these days. We're back in a moment. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. The workplace is complicated these days. In some cases, 4 generations are working together with different perspectives on how to get things done. Many workers are stressed out by deadlines and balancing home and work responsibilities. A study out this last week indicates boredom is an issue for many on the job, but companies need workers, and they all hope to identify and hire strong employees. So what can they do? Joining us today, human resources expert Brian Simmons. He works for Lexington-based CMI Consulting. Recently got an award from some folks, a perfect 5.0 rating for an employee recognition, and also has done a workshop called Who's Stressed Out? So as we welcome you, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
I'll begin with that question. Who's stressed out in the workplace these days?
95% of the people.
Really?
Just about everybody is stressed out. When you look at stress, we have these things out of society that stress us out, and then we bring those with us into the workplace, and then there are some things that are intrinsic to the workplace that stress us out. So when you combine those together, everybody's stressed out.
Something that has really come on the screen recently, certainly for folks, is the harassment and discrimination issues. We've seen the things in Hollywood and elsewhere, and it reminds folks of the difficulty that some may be facing that is unseen, and also things that employers need to adjust to.
Exactly, and that causes stress. One of the primary factors for an employer in reducing stress becomes having a culture or an environment of anti-discrimination and anti-harassment. Discrimination and harassment in the workplace is one of the top stress-causing situations.
And how does that manifest itself?
Well, it manifests itself in several ways. Stress has to manifest itself physically. People become physically ill, chest pains, things like that. In the mind, it brings about depression, anxiety, also the behaviors that take place. You know, drug use begins to increase, alcohol use, profanity in the workplace, and things like that. So it has a true what we call impact. It impacts the morale, the productivity, the attitude in the workplace. You know, the communication becomes ineffective, and then there's no teamwork if it impacts it negatively.
So simply not as effective as a team as folks might be otherwise.
Oh, exactly.
What are some other big things out there that are causing stress on the job today?
Well, on the job, there's one thing that we talked about with boredom.
Yep.
If you're not using the inherent skills of someone, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health talks about some jobs that already there's danger inherently in the job. There's heavy workloads. Shift work causes stress. You know, when you're working that third shift, that can cause stress. And then the relationship with the supervisors. We have a lot of supervisors now, when we talk generational differences in the workplace, that although they did well technically, they never received the supervisory skills needed to be able to help manage stress in the workplace on a team.
Well, let's talk about that. You know, diversity can be such a strength for companies, certainly, but there can also be divisions. We now have, as we pointed out, 4 generations in the workplace together. What is it like to have the boomers, the Generation Xers, the millennials, and now the fast-growing segment of the Generation Zs that are out there, all working together?
All working together. And this is simply what it comes down to, Bill, is people are people. You know, regardless of what generation we're in, people are people, and what we all want is respect for who we are. So whether we're traditionalists, we want respect for the traditions that we made. You know, whether we're baby boomers, we want respect for the inventions that we created. Whether we're in that Generation Y, they want respect for bringing in the digital age. You know, and the millennials want respect to say, hey, here I am ready to conquer the world.
Right.
So we want respect.
Well, how can the 22-year-old just entering the workforce, coming in with bright ideas and a brand new degree maybe, get along with the 50-somethings or 60-somethings who are out there working, who have a breadth of experience, but, you know, may not put all that value on the technology or so forth?
They need to take time to communicate. It's all about effectively communicating and building the relationship. One of the things that people want is we want meaningful relationships. We want meaningful moments, and that happens in the workplace. When you're full-time working somewhere, the majority of your waking hours during that full-time work week are spent at work. So you want meaningful relationships, and that's a matter of communicating with people, building those relationships, regardless of what generation it is. Again, people are people.
As they work together and begin to try to problem solve, would you recommend to employers that they make sure that they do put people together who are from different backgrounds, different ages, and so on?
Most definitely, and that's the beauty of diversity. You know, they call it variety is the spice of life. You know, variety is really what makes a good team, because maybe the aspect or point of view that I may look at something from, you don't. But when we blend it together, how much richer it could be. And so that's why it should be embraced. That's why a lot of people are talking about inclusion. When we look at diversity, diversity is just based on differences. And when we have differences, we have to label those differences. And then we feed them into what we call our belief system filter. And that's what then results in the behaviors that we have toward each other. So it's a matter of really appreciating the differences, and let's see how we can blend those together to make the workplace better.
So what is a good best practice in the workplace as people try to alleviate stress, make things more seamless?
Well, there are some things that I call my PMAs, prevention techniques, management techniques, and the ways to alleviate stress, just get it away. But you have to acknowledge that it's there. You know, you have to label your stress. What are these things stressing you out? Are they societal stresses that there's nothing you can do about it to change it? Are there things that are intrinsic to the workplace that are stressing you out as well? And so what are they? And where do they start? And then journal about it. You know, that's one tip. You can journal it. You can lean on your creative side. Art is a great stress reliever as well. You can have a good rapport with your supervisor in the workplace. You know, having a good rapport and being able to communicate with someone really decreases the stress, because you feel like you can actually acknowledge it. And then, you know, we can't change the things that have already happened. So we have to find ways, too, of getting beyond some of those things that we can't change.
Let bygones be bygones sometimes?
Bygones be bygones.
Now, you know, the life-work balance, and we hear so much about that these days. We all have responsibilities outside of work and right. in our communities, with our families and so forth. Do employers need to recognize that?
Well, definitely. And that's a part of appreciating employees as people, not just as a human resource in the organization, but the person as a whole. And so once you think about the other parts of life of a person, you know, they have things going on in society. There's no placard above anybody's head that says, you know, I just lost a loved one within the last 6 months. So all of these things that are taking place with people really need to be taken into account by the employer.
As we head into the holiday season, is that an opportunity for people to maybe be a little kinder to each other, get to know each other a little bit better, or are we all going our separate ways trying to get things done and it's more stressful?
Well, it gets more stressful, but if we back off of the stress, it will turn out a lot better. We're actually doing some stress workshops and things like that. Even the UK Federal Credit Union, I think in December the 13th, we're doing a presentation much like you saw on the stress. So hopefully we'll be able to help people bring it down and take it back a bit.
All right. People enjoy being empowered, don't they?
Yes, they do.
Yeah. All right. Brian, we appreciate you coming in today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, again, thank you
See you
for
from
having
time
me.
to time as you keep us updated on workplace issues.
I certainly will.
All right. Thank you for joining us for this edition of WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Hey, we'll see you bright and early this week on WKYT this morning with that shift work. We start at 4:30 a.m. and we have updates always on WKYT.com. You make it a good week ahead.